Welcome to the Museum of Aquarium and Pet History. We've got a really big one this month. This is mid-century modern bird cages. That's right, mid-century modern bird cages. For those of you that are fans of the TV show Mad Men, then you know all about mid-century modern because the whole show is based on that. But this is just going to be bird cages. So this is a little more complicated than the other two videos I did. I've done one on Victorian bird cages and one on Art Deco bird cages. Now, the difference is there's about a dozen manufacturers in the United States or importers that were making bird cages back then in those two eras. But mid-century modern, we have 20 different companies either making bird cages or importing bird cages. So it's a little more complicated, a little more moving parts, but I'm going to try and get through most of them here. So stay with me and we'll start. Okay, so mid-century modern, let's talk about it for a second here. 1945 to 1969, with the main part of it being in the 1950s, of course. It is characterized by clean, simple lines, generally does not include decorative embellishments like a lot of the Deco or especially the Victorian cages had. It was influenced by the modern movement, which was Brazilian and Scandinavian architecture based. Basically, it was a straight line, open design. The biggest thing with bird cages that I can see is, of course, we got rid of all the finials and the decorative embellishments, but the cages got a little bit larger in size, on the inside especially, and the stands for the cages they were very simplistic. You either had hairpin stands or you had tubular stands, and that was pretty much it for the mid-century modern or the MCM era. If you want to see architecture based on this, you can see basically Victorian architecture all over England. You could see the Art Deco architecture all over Miami. Mid-century modern, Palm Springs. Yes, Palm Springs has probably the biggest influx of mid-century modern housing and that kind of thing. So, mid-century design tends to be retro, understated, utilitarian with an industrial look. The Eames chair is iconic for mid-century modern. So that's all I'm going to say about the era itself. So let's talk about the cages. And we'll start with Hendrix. All right, so these are two of probably Hendrix's most popular mid-century modern cages. This one here, which went by 3 different product numbers. And this one here, which was called the Hatbox cage. That's what the collectors called it. I think maybe at one point Hendrix called that as well. Hendrix basically did chrome plating, they did brass plating, and in some cases they did powder coating, which I know they called it enamel paint wear or something to that effect, but it was basically powder coating. But most of them were chrome plated. Chrome plated was really the highlight of the MCM or mid-century modern era. So one of the interesting things about Hendrix, and eventually we need to do a video on Hendrix because it's such an amazing company that went through 3 generations and then was picked up by a 4th company, so it's really in its 4th kind of family generation going on now. But the son of Andrew Hendrix, which was Nathan, he picked up the company from his father in 1907, 1910, after his father passed away. But then I see that Nathan died like literally 20 years later. So he made it past World War I, and I really thought he made it into the Great Depression, and he made it through World War II, but he didn't. So that just leads me to believe that basically the 2 daughters, their husbands ran Hendrix from after World War I up until the 1960s, when Hendrix filed bankruptcy about 1969. And at that time, it was picked up by Preview Metal. They were a birdcage manufacturer in Chicago. They picked it up and they basically absorbed everything from Hendrix. They bought some of the machinery, they bought the name, everything else. So that's why sometimes you see Preview Hendrix. That's because it's a combination of Preview Metal and Hendrix. All right. Now again, talking about this cage, I just want to tell you, this cage was 1949, and it's called the 495 cage, and then in another catalog it's called the 495S or 495C cage, depending if it's stainless steel or chromium plate or brass plated body with a wrought iron stand, etc., etc. The Hatbox cage, they call that the 1940 BB bird cage. And again, the BB or the C is whether it's brass plate or chromium plated, which is chrome. Don't know why they call it that. So that is some of the little things that Hendrix had done. Now I want to show you one of my favorite Hendrix cages from the mid-century modern era. Okay, this is the Carnival cage. Now this was a new concept that Hendrix had done. This plastic is vacuum formed. So in other words, it's a sheet of plastic that had this crazy mid-century modern design, and they would heat it up and they'd push it onto a mold, and it would make this little Buddha kind of a roof to it. And they made the base, and the cage collapsed. So it was one of the first knockdown cages that they developed. So they could ship it pretty flat. I mean, and then basically the cage just came apart, and you put the top and bottom on, and you had the perches and everything, and away you went. It came in a black with the gold little flakes, and it also came in a white with the gold flakes. So it came in two different colors. This particular one, because I've never found one in the United States, I found this in England. And when I bought it, the person I bought it from said that his wife had bought it in the United States and shipped it over to England, basically because she liked the cage so much. So it was a very delicate cage. It came in with a split in the roof. We had to fix that. So it had a few little issues, but it's one of my favorite Hendrix cages from the mid-century modern era. Okay, so let's show you a few more Hendrix cages. So this is a cage that Hendrix made for bird shows, and it was the American Singers Club official show cage, which would be in a canary club. And they made these cages for the club, and I've never seen them before. This one came up for auction, and we got it, but it's definitely incredibly rare. It didn't have the little base tray in it, so that was missing. But it's really interesting to see that they cooperated with a lot of the clubs, and they made this special cage just for them. So these are called cylinder cages, and a lot of bird cage companies during the mid-century modern era made these cages, these round cylinder cages. They always had hairpin legs, they always had a plastic top and bottom. This one has a wood finial, this one has a little metal finial, or actually that's metal. This one is Preview Hendrix. So, you know, this was after Preview had absorbed Hendrix. So probably late 60s, maybe even early 70s, but it's still in the mid-century modern design. And it's got the very interesting atomic looking legs. That's you know, the atomic era that overlapped the mid-century modern era. That's an interesting little feature of that particular cage. This one was by Pacific Bird Cage Company out of Los Angeles, and this was their version of the cylinder cage. It's a little bit wider, not quite as aesthetic or quite as interesting as this one here. Okay, now we're going to talk about an interesting group of birdcage manufacturers and importers that were all the same family. Now, if some of you saw the video that we did with Jason Savitt from Preview Hendrix, he talks about how everything is related basically in his family when it comes to birdcage manufacturing. So I asked him recently because I found an ad for RIC Manufacture, and I've never seen them before. And he basically had told me that RIC was the partner of his grandfather, and they had a falling out, and he started his own company called Rosnell International. So that was his name, his last name was Rosnell. I've never seen an RIC cage that I could identify because I don't have their catalog, unfortunately. But the other ones, like Reliance Pet Products, which was also called Repco, which stood for Reliance Pet Products Corporation, that was in New York, and that was Jason Savitt and Rick Savitt of Preview Hendrix. That was their grandfather. And he both manufactured and imported cages. I think he imported from a German company. At some point in time, he got tired of the manufacturing part, and he turned that over to Preview Metal. And so Preview Metal took over the manufacturing for him until he finally closed. And then it all went to basically to Preview. So you could see these cages, and I have advertising that shows that these cages are either Repco, which is Reliance, or they're Preview, but they're not marked. But these are their cages. And you could see, you know, some of these, like when they have the owl feeder, those are imported from Hong Kong. So the owl feeder was kind of a indication that, hey, this might be an imported cage. You can sometimes tell by the feeders, like if the feeders are German, in some cases it is imported from Germany, but these cages aren't marked. But in most cases that I've found through advertising, cages like this from the mid-century modern, from the 1950s and 1960s, are either the Repco, which is Reliance Pet Products Corporation, the RIC, which is Rosnell International, or it is the Preview, which is now Preview Hendrix, of course. Now, I do have the name of the German company that I am positive that they basically had bought from. Okay, so here's 3 more cages from Reliance Pet Products or Repco or basically Preview. You can see right here, this one actually is marked Reliance. So this one they actually put a tag on. And this is a very common cage that's usually found in the early 1960s. Kind of a first cage that they would sell a parakeet in, that kind of thing. This one here, the feeders are imported from Japan. So this probably was an imported cage, probably from Reliance as well. This definitely was an imported cage, probably from Reliance, and this was from the German company that they imported from. Definitely looks like a German cage. Wonderful glass work that they did here on the side. So it's a really interesting cage. I've never seen another one with I call it the porthole cage because it has a little porthole windows. So there's 3. And let me show you a few more. Okay, so here's 2 more cages from Reliance or from Preview. Could be Preview Hendrix or probably Preview Metal. So it's definitely mid-1960s or 1950s in there. I think it's actually late 1950s or at the latest, very early 1960s. The reason being is this is a lot of work doing this boomerang style cage. So this probably, again, was an import from Germany. Really beautiful cage. I love the design. Very mid-century modern. They made lots of cages like this. These were entry-level cages, and you could tell when they're 50s because the top and the bottom is metal. If the top and bottom was plastic, that's about early 1960s on up. So, or forward, I should say. So this definitely is late 1950s, probably early 1960s. Both these Reliance Pet Products, I'm sure. And as far as the German company that they bought from, that was Josef Voss in West Germany at the time, West Germany. That was the company that actually made a lot of the cages for Reliance in New York. And then again, they turned it all over to Preview. So this is a Reliance cage, and it is in one of their advertisements. It has the owl feeders, and we know that they use the owl feeders. It's a pretty interesting cage. It's definitely a cage that's been made in the same shape by Hendrix and by a couple other different companies. So it's a very popular round ball kind of a cage. But they do have the feeders on the inside of the cage, which is interesting. I actually like them better on the inside because the feeders being on the inside make it a lot easier to prevent the feeders from falling off the cage, because sometimes if the wires come loose, they fall off, smash on the ground, and then you've just lost 2 very old, very rare birdcage feeders. So now I don't put feeders on the cages anymore unless the feeders are mounted on the inside like this, where they're completely safe, and if they fall off, they're just going to fall right to the bottom tray. Nothing's going to happen to them. But this again is a Reliance cage, came from out of New York. Reliance was in New York, and they probably imported this out of Germany, possibly Hong Kong. This could have been Hong Kong as well. They were a birdcage importer, but they were also a manufacturer until they turned their manufacturing over to Preview Metal. All right, here is another Reliance out of New York, imported cage, probably from West Germany. And the reason I know it's Reliance is because Reliance used a little Bakelite handle for their trays. This is missing the Bakelite handle, but all the other Reliance cages that I have that little Bakelite handle. Normally it's either single or it's a little double one right here, but it's not metal. It is Bakelite, and that's kind of a trademark for Reliance. And again, that came from probably the German company that made it. But it's, again, this is, you might say Art Deco, but it's really going over towards this mid-century modern. This was definitely 1950s era, this cage. And it's got a very nice chrome plating going on. So this is another Reliance cage out of New York, probably imported from West Germany. This definitely is late 1950s. I know this is Reliance because I've seen it on their advertising. It's got this the same metal top that Reliance used. It's got the stand that Reliance would have used. This cage came with this stand. And then again, this is the Bakelite handle that Reliance, characteristic of Reliance cages, was this Bakelite handle right here. And then you could see it's tubular on the stand with a little architectural element in the middle, and then just a tubular base. So the last cage we want to show you is this one here. And this probably is also a Reliance cage or a preview Hendrix cage. And again, you could tell it's 1950s because look at this detail in the top, and it's metal, and the bottom is metal. And this would have been an entry-level cage. It's very small. Look at the hairpin legs on the stand. That was very typical of the stands from that era. And here's another stand from the era. This has that sort of atomic feel to it. And it's got, it's basically chrome plated on the bottom top, the ring, and it's got the hairpin legs. So I'm not sure who made that particular stand, but it's a very cool atomic era, which overlaps the mid-century modern. It's late 40s, it goes into the early 50s. So now let's get into Pacific Cage Company. Pacific Cage Company was out of Los Angeles. And one of their coolest cages that they ever made was this one here. And they made this in the 1940s, and it was called the Hollywood. That's what they called it. This was the original stand for this cage, and it's a tubular with a very simplistic black base. You know, it's got this iron with a little round ball on the end. And you've got a very typical cylindrical cage, medium size, not super small, with this little funny little design that they did on it with beads, or with a chain, I should say. So this is a really cool cage. It was very popular for them. It sold really well, and it was called the Hollywood cage. And this is the only one I've found or have seen of this particular model. Somebody loved it because it was in good shape when I found it. It's got a little bit of rust on it, but eventually we'll get around to trying to clean that up a little bit. It's hard when you restore things. You don't want to over-restore because you want to leave natural patina to it. You want to show it that it has some age, that it's lived a long life. You know, if you restore it too much, then it's too new looking. So again, that's the Hollywood. That's from Pacific Cage Company. So the one last thing I want to say about Pacific Cage Company out of Los Angeles is I believe they were one of the first companies to make a Mynah bird cage. You know, Mynah birds were, I don't know when they were first imported, but they're one of the best talkers. They're related to the crows. They're kind of an Asian crow is what they are. But they made a big, very basic, large cage for Mynah birds. They also made a lot of the cylindrical cages. They were very big into the cylindrical cages like we showed you earlier. They made about 7 different models of those. And surprisingly enough, they had a lot of competition. I don't know if they were the first to make that cage design and then everybody jumped on it and copied them because it was such a good seller. But another company that I was just recently found out about was a company called Custom Craft Industries, which is in Los Angeles, that also made bird cages, including the cylindrical one. So here they had a competitor right next door, same town. Who would have known? Okay, let's go to the next big cage company during the time period, which is Crown Bird Cage Company. Crown also made heated dog houses. They made quite a few other things. But they were owned by Summer Metalcraft Corporation. Now, I don't know the whole history of Crown. It's a mystery. We've got some catalogs, but I haven't found much information about them. It makes sense that there was a metal company that owned them, and this was a subsidiary of that metal company. This was a huge cage in the late 50s, early 60s. They made this cage with a stand that went with it. I don't have the stand here to show you, unfortunately, but I'll see if I could find a picture and put it up. But this was one of the Crown cages. It was a big company that was a big competitor of Hendrix and of Preview Metal, of Reliance, and Pacific Cage Company. Those were really the big ones during the mid-century modern time. So let me show you another crown cage. Okay, here we have a crown cage. This is a very simplistic one. It's painted green. When looking at the paint, you know, it's not powder coated. It probably is what the green enamel paint, which just means that they probably bake it twice in the oven, so it's got a real clean look to it. It's got the crown logo. It's even got the crown down here on the plastic seat guard. It has the original seat guard, the original cups. And what's really cool about this cage, it has the original stand. And I could tell it's 1950s just by the design and by the stand. You know, they started, again, tubular stands or hairpin stands. This one is the remaining of a little bit of design to it. It's got this actual wood in the stand, but it's still simple rod and fairly simple leaf pattern at the base. So not Art Deco, definitely, but definitely mid-century modern. So again, Crown was getting utilitarian and really wanting to make cages to compete in the marketplace. And that's what sold. People didn't want a fancy, expensive cage. They just wanted a cage that worked for their parakeet or their canary. And again, parakeets were becoming super popular in the 1950s. They really weren't around in the Victorian era as pets in this country. But in the 50s, they were becoming huge, lots of clubs. All right, so this is one that probably a lot of you have been scratching your head about and wondering, who makes those plastic bird cages? Some people call them luccites. Lucite is a type of plastic, so I'll just call them a plastic bird cage. And this was a pretty interesting company. This was the Bernard Edward Company under the name of Beco. So Bernard Edward, the Co is for company. So Beco, that's who made these cages. And they didn't just make plastic bird cages, they actually made metal cages as well, not just the plastic ones. So they made 4 different designs in plastic. This is 2 of them. And they came in a clear, they came in a, which they call crystal, they came in a green, they came in a rose. I've never seen a rose colored one. And they came in a gold color. One model came in the gold color, and I've never seen that one either. The bird feeders they made themselves, plastic. The entire cage is plastic except for the little metal tray in the bottom. The tray is metal, and the wood perches, of course. And this one here, this might have been added later, this little swing, but this swing in here is completely plastic. And the opening is plastic to get to the bird. So it's pretty interesting. And one little bit of trivia on this cage, there was an airline called Capital Airline. They sold to United Airlines. But Capital Airlines had one of these cages on their planes, and inside of it was a canary, and they fed it food and they let it fly. They said actually that it's been 600 times around the world. The parakeets in the Cloud Club of Capital Airlines Constellations, that's the planes, have flown a distance of over 600 times around the world. Capital Airlines has selected KT Parakeet mixture exclusively to feed their birds and to keep them healthy and happy. So obviously it was an advertisement for KT, but they show a picture of the woman with a box of KT food feeding the parakeet and a picture of the plane, Constellation plane. So I thought that was pretty cool that they actually, to relieve stress of the passengers flying, they had a parakeet on the plane. And I thought that's really interesting. So let me show you some other Beco cages. Here's a wire Beco cage. And again, it says Beco here and the little seat guard. It's got the little thing right down here. Now remember, Beco, I don't know if they did the metalwork themselves. I assume they probably did, but they certainly were a plastic injection molder. So they did all the plastic work themselves. I mean, the base is plastic. The cage really sets into this plastic base. So I thought that was really interesting. It allowed them to mass produce cages at a relatively affordable price. So that is the Beco cage. Now I want to show you a cage. I'm not sure if it's Beco or if it's an import from like Reliance. I'm not positive. I'm leaning towards Beco, but here's a really cool cage that I call the Barbie cage. And as you can see, it's got windows, it's got this whole plastic base, which makes me think of Beco. It has a pond, it has a little sign, it has a little flamingo that's goes somewhere over here. It's got the feeders that look like Beco feeders actually. And I did have an Art Deco, kind of a mid-century modern type feeder I thought I'd just stick over here. It's got a little table that the bird can sit at if you let him hang out on the front area. So really the bird can really sit on the roof as well. So it's a neat little cage. And I've seen it, I haven't seen this one in an ad, but it did used to come up all the time in the 60s and 70s. So I think it was from early 1960s, and I call it the Barbie cage. Okay, now we're going to go with imported cages. These are Jenny cage, and this was imported from the United Kingdom, from England. It was made by a large wire company over there, and at first they were imported by Spratz, and then later on they were imported by another different company. I think all up until about the 1960s, and then after that they were not imported any longer. Not sure if the cage company is still in business. I doubt that they are. But you could see that they made these, the chrome plated cage, the classic one. And on the sides, it says Jenny cage, where you would put the feeders. They used the large slip-in feeders. This was probably 60s. This was probably late 50s. This is 1960s. This very dirty cage was also a Jenny cage. It definitely has, again, the aluminum little profile right here with the name of the company. Has plastic feeders. They went from, you know, ceramic to plastic between the 50s and the 60s. So this would be an entry-level cage. This is my favorite. This is like an Art Deco almost, but it's really 1950s, so it's definitely mid-century modern. Jenny cage, they've got the G logo is the hanger, which I thought was wonderful. They've got porcelain feeders that are painted blue, and they say British. So these are porcelain, and they're even cracked. They're crackled, so because they're so old. So this is 1950s, so this is 60 plus years old. It's got a little celluloid seat guard with a little, this is a design they used in most of their cages. This is really one of my favorite Jenny cages. So that was imported. There was a couple other companies that imported cages from England. One of them was Clean-A-Cage. That was the actual name of the company, Clean-A-Cage. And then there was one other company from England, but I don't think that they were imported into the US. But let me show you one more Jenny cage. Okay, so here's another Jenny cage. And what I like about this one is it really shows you that England started making the cages larger, even the entry-level cages. So this is pretty much a mid-range entry-level type cage, stainless steel. Has this nice little top feature going on. Has the cups from Jenny cage. I don't know if I can get these off or not, but very modern cups with Jenny cage written right on them. And these are made out of plastic. So this probably was late 50s, early 1960s Jenny cage. And I just like the larger size that they made here. And then you could see again the tubular stand with one little architectural element in the middle here, and then just a straight plated iron base. The base wouldn't be stainless steel, it would be iron, and they would actually plate it. And again, they painted red along the roundness of the base. I thought was really interesting. That's a nice element. So one more thing about the imported cages from the United Kingdom. The Clean-A-Cage was actually imported by Middle West distributors. So we know for a fact that it was in the country. I've never seen one. If any of you guys have one that's marked Clean-A-Cage, get in touch, send me a picture, I'd love to see it. Other than that, that's it for the imported United Kingdom cages. So let's now look at a really interesting cage that was made by someone that was not really in the birdcage industry, just wanted to make a very cool birdcage. So it looks to me like he was a design artist that made a very functional cage and got a patent on it. Okay, so this is a Marcel Arnold cage. Now he patented this in 1953. What's unusual about this cage is, of course, the glass front and back. So if you want to take this off and you want to interact with your bird, take them out, whatever, let them play, you just take this off. You want to clean the cage, just take this out. So that's kind of unique. I mean, there are companies out of Europe that made this the solid front glass, front and back, but this was one of the first American companies to ever do this. And it was in 1953. He did it under his own name. He sold it under his own name. And he only made two designs. He made the round design and he made sort of a hex six-sided design. The hex one I've never ever seen, so I don't know if he ever made it. He did get a patent on the design patent, but he as far as I know, he never made that cage. He only made the round ones. What's unique about these isn't just the glass front and back. The fact is they're all aluminum. There is no steel wire, there's no copper wire. It's all aluminum. The base, the tray, the wire, everything is aluminum, so it will not rust. Kind of a neat little feature. The other thing is that he made these in two colors. He made a black one, and then he made the aluminum one. So the black one was probably anodized aluminum black. I don't see those very often. Apparently he made a stand for these. I don't know. I've never seen a picture of this. Well, I have seen a picture of the stand, but I don't know whether it's real or not. Until I see it in an advertisement for him, I can't tell you that it's 100% real. The patents only show the cages. They do not show any stand at all. He also patented a parakeet mirror perch in 1956, and he patented a multi-purpose fish aquarium cover in 1958. So he did come out with a couple other things too. I've never seen the aquarium cover and I've never seen the perch, but I have seen a lot of these cages. The price is all over the map, from anywhere from $75 to $750 on up. I don't know why, but the price is just everywhere because it is classic high-end mid-century modern. So if you want a high-end mid-century modern cage for your very expensive mid-century modern house in Palm Springs, this is probably the cage that you want. This is a Marsal Arnold cage. Okay, one more thing on this cage too I forgot to mention. He sold these cages. This is what makes me think he wasn't really a pet industry person, but he sold them at Macy's, Bloomingdale's, Gimbel's, Gertz, Bamberger's, and other leading pet shops in the New York metropolitan area. So that's one thing that he had said on his little tagline. So really, these were sold in high-end department stores, which is unusual because a lot of those department stores didn't have a pet department. Some did, but a lot of them did not. So that is the last bit of information I have on this particular cage. So the other cage companies where I don't have examples of their cages, but we know that those cage companies existed. I mean, I don't have physical examples, but I do have advertising on them, and we'll show you these ads right now. But those companies are the Hershey Company, which made basically travel cages and show cages. They specialized in that, believe it or not. The Crescent Manufacturing, which made show cages. They were in Texas. The Texas Birdcage Company out of Houston. The F. Herbst and Company out of Chicago made breeding cages and travel cages. Conark's Bird Farm out of LA, they also made cages. JoJo's Importers, big importer out of Long Beach, California. They imported tons of cages from mostly from Hong Kong and possibly from Europe. CAF, or NAF, I think it's pronounced, is the German company that basically was imported cages from Intercontinental Trading Company. And Geisler, believe it or not, Geisler, the bird food company, it's been around since the 1800s. They actually imported cages as well. They didn't make their own cages, but they imported them. And then two last ones, the B&B Manufacturing made cages, and Custom Craft, like I mentioned before, out of Los Angeles, they also made cages. So that is everything I have to date on mid-century modern cages. As we get more information, we'll update this video. I especially want to get more information on Reliance. Reliance and the Preview Hendrix, especially their catalogs from the 50s and 60s. I hope we get some of those in, and then we can basically give you more information on how those three companies that I talked about all kind of went together. And those cages are unmarked for the most part, so that's kind of interesting when you find one and you want to know what it is, because we get emails all the time like, what kind of bird cage do I have? And if it's not marked, you know, we have to take a guess, or now we know that most likely it's Reliance or possibly Preview, but Preview did mark most of their cages. And of course now Preview is Preview Hendrix, and they did buy out Hendrix from the bankruptcy court in 1969, and they bought the name and they bought a lot of the equipment, and they continued with the Hendrix name. So Preview Hendrix is still alive today. It's just not Hendrix, it's Preview Hendrix. I just want to thank my good friend Jason Savitt for helping me with some of the information on this. I'm very grateful. And I hope that I answered some of your questions. If you have any questions or you have any cages you want to show us, be sure to send us an email. Otherwise, hey, it's been great, and I will see you for the big video next month.